Hello everyone, Craig here. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're talking about fixing this issue here. This is probably a bit of an extreme example. We've got a lot going on here, which is breaking our layout. We've got lots of different size body text for these cards. We've got different lengths of headings. And in this case here, it really is quite extreme. Um, there's not a lot we can do to fix this and make it perfect, but what we want to do is ultimately make it so that each of these headings occupy the same space, so that this text here starts at the same place as this text here, and all the buttons sit on the bottom row. And that's probably the first thing that we can fix quite easily, and probably one of the more important things, because at least by putting the button on the bottom, even though we've got the borders which kind of define how big the card is, it's still it looks very odd. It looks all out of place. So that's quite an easy fix. If you scroll to the next example, what we've got here is all I've done for this, and there's probably a number of ways we can do this, but just for the sake of this example, just to give us our visual representation here, I've put all of this content inside a block, and the button is also inside a block. And then I've used the cards themselves grid, or they may even be flex, but what the point is, I've aligned them vertically with the space between, so that the button and the content are on the most outer extremities. So that kind of fixed that, but we've still got this issue here with the text, on different cards is misaligned, and that's the next thing we'll look at fixing. So if we look at our next example, we can see from a very visual perspective how this can look. Having this grey background here and this text having so much text here really makes things quite ugly. But what we've done is every section in every card starts and finishes in the same place, occupying the same amount of space. This changes as things kind of drop down into different rows. So each row has its own, let's turn on, I'm not quite sure how this is going to look at the moment because I haven't looked at, let's scroll down, and what we should see now as we do that, these headings here are quite neat now, where we kind of expect them to be. And down here, this one now, because this is got more room, it's now down to 2 lines, and this is 2 lines. Of course, we could do things to neaten this up and kind of bring the headings, perhaps center them vertically. We could perhaps make the text a bit smaller so that it's not quite as bad, and admittedly this is an extreme case, yeah. We would just avoid this as much as possible in a real life scenario, so we wouldn't see that. But I have seen it where the lines, we are encroaching on 2 lines, and it's a very problem I had a few weeks ago when I was working on a client's website. And so this is what we're aiming for in terms of fixing the problem. We need to ignore that, and this is probably what we'll end up with, or what we want to end up with. Nicely lined up headers, and despite the text being different sizes, everything is just all in the right place. And although this is horrible, the reason why it's important is this line here is continuous across all 4 cards. Now you can use this in something like this, which may be highlighting certain services, or you could use it in a query loop and output it as your posts this way and have endless number of them. Whatever you need to do, and as I said, sort of showed before, as we shrink these in and make them smaller, that they will reorganize accordingly. So let's go and have a quick look at what I'm going to do. Is I'm going to show you the CSS first, because This can be achieved with CSS quite easily. And then what we'll do is go and have a look at Bricks Builder and see how we can achieve this purely through the Bricks Builder interface. So here's our CSS. We've got a container, and for those, let's go and have a. I'll tell you what. Let's go. Where's the builder? We're in the builder already. So the container is this CAD group. It wraps around all the CADs, and what we've done there is we've set that to display of grid. Got a grid template, columns of repeat for 1FR, so we've got 4 equally spaced or equally sized CADs, and I've given it a grid gap of 8 rem. Then we've got the individual CADs. There's some stuff here, the border radius, overflow. That's just all about a bit of styling. Let's move that down one line there. So again, we're setting this as a display grid. And the key thing here, the thing that kind of makes this work, or the first thing that contributes to making this work, is grid template rows subgrid. So now we're telling this CAD to be a subgrid of the main grid. And I'll show you what it does exactly in a moment. And then what we're doing to make sure that these all, if we don't specify how many rows our CADs need to occupy, then everything ends up stacked on top of each other. And I'll show you in a minute what I mean by that. And then we got row gap. So we're overriding the grid's gap of 0.8 rems. So the CADs will stay 0.8 rems apart, but inside I'm setting the row gap to 0 pixels so that we can have more control over the gaps between the different elements within the CAD. So let's go and have a quick little look at how some of this works then. I'm going to inspect here, and we're going to use, let's turn off responsive mode for a moment. Get this into position here, and we are going to, when we're in the inspector, so just in case anybody's unaware, we can right click, go to the bottom here. This is in Microsoft Edge, which is based on Chrome, so Chrome is the same. There's a number of browsers out there based on Chrome, and all pretty much do the same thing, I believe. Safari and Firefox do things slightly differently, so if you're using those browsers, it's just look up how you get into the developer tools in your browser. But right click, inspect, and we bring up the elements view. And so here we can scroll down, hover over. So there's the container, and then these are the CADs. And what I want to show you is over on the right here, we can turn off certain CSS properties. So what I want to do is come down here and turn off this row span. So by not specifying the span, that's how many rows these CADs span across. This grid by default only has 1 row, and so the CAD occupies 1 row and stacks each of the elements on top of each other. But by using grid row, we're saying that this CAD occupies 4 rows, and the browser automatically gives the layout 4 rows. And we can see this by, if we turn this on, when we're in the elements view, we can turn on grid and subgrid. And so this is what our grid looks like now. We've got 1 section, 2 section, or 1 row, 2 row, 3 rows and 4 rows. If we go back and look at our CADs and we turn off the span, we've just got 1 row. So if you wanted only 3 sections, then you could do span 3. If you only wanted 2 sections, you do span 2. And if you wanted more sections, you would just span the number of rows that you want your content needs to take up. So let's see what happens when we turn this on. So this is giving us a bit more detail about the subgrid, just showing us the lines for the subgrid. So we've got line 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, the vertical line 1 and vertical line 2. Hopefully all that makes sense. Let's just take a quick dive back into the CSS a minute, make sure we not missed anything. All I will say is all this down here is just a bit of styling for the individual sections of the card. So the heading container, the body container, and the button container just gives it a little bit of padding. So we can mostly ignore that. These are the important bits about getting the layout right. As you can see, there's not a lot involved here. It's just setting a grid container and then setting up the cards to take advantage of that grid container. So let's jump into Bricks Builder and start fleshing this out. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to reset things a minute. Let's go into snippets, fluent snippets, and deactivate this snippet. We're going to refresh the page, which will make everything appear broken. Let's scroll down to our section here. And now, as you can see, everything is kind of in a flex flow. Now they are. So let's go back down here, go to our card group. Make sure we select our class. We're going to set this to a grid. We're going to give it template columns of a repeat for 1FR. So that's that. We want to give it a row gap of, I'm using core framework. You can just put some values in here, however you enter in your sizes, whether you use variables or tokens or a framework. So I'm using core framework, so I'm going to set this to, let's set it to small. So grid, repeat, and gap. So that's that. So let's we're inside, let's get inside the card group, go into the cards, and make sure we select our class. Let's remove that a minute because I want you to see me build this out. So we got grid. We want to set the template rows to subgrid, which is going to stack everything on top of each other because we've only got one row. But now what we want to do is force the browser into believing, into accepting that there's 4 rows. So we're going to span each card across 4 rows. And essentially what this does is set each row. This would be the equivalent of, let's jump into the card group. This should be the equivalent of saying auto, auto, or auto, or you could say, I guess, repeat. Can't even type at the moment. 4 autos. So that's the equivalent of doing that, because what we're doing here is we're saying span 4 rows, but we're not specifying any size to them. We just want them to take up the size that's required for the content. So that's what is forcing the browser into doing. And then the other thing to bear in mind with the cards is up here, to achieve this look here, you may not have a shaded background like this in your design, so you don't need to worry about it then. But if you want to have a shaded background, as I have here, and as I did in my project a couple of weeks ago, then you need to set the height of this heading container to or even this heading container to 100%, so that it takes up all the height of this row. So that's it really. Nice short one for you, which I'm sure you're all grateful for, because the last couple have been gruelers really. But anyway, love to hear your thoughts on this. Have you yourself used Subgrid before now, or have you got any ideas on how we could use Subgrid in the future for maybe future videos? If so, put them in the comments below. And of course, any questions, also drop them in the comments. I will include in the description links to the code, including a copy of this section. So if you download that or copy that section, you'll be able to import this whole thing. And also as well, I will also include a within that same link will be the CSS. So we'll just finish up with saying thank you for your time. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you found it helpful, and I'll speak to you again soon. Take care.